All right, looks like we're live. Let's check the audio. Hello, hello, hello. All right, looks like we're live. All right, a little bit of a delay, but it's all right. Now let's get the stream link and share that with the group. Okay, where is this stream link? Never had trouble finding it before. I'm actually at a loss at the moment. Where on earth is the link for the stream? There's got to be a URL here. All right, we'll find it a little bit differently. Okay, is this it? All right. All right, let's kick it off real quick. Okay, so what we're going to do today, and I know it's a little bit cliche, but I also think there's a good reason for it. I'm going to just build a simple to-do list application in Vue just because it sort of it accommodates all of the different topics that you need to learn more or less. I'm not sure if we're going to use any computed properties, but I'll find somewhere to use that. So I'm just gonna make a directory here, and that is going to be Vue to do. Now, I already have the Vue CLI installed, so I believe if I do Vue, it's going to be Vue create, but if I do Vue -- version, it'll show that I have the Vue CLI. If you need to install that yourself, you need to have node.js installed, and that's pretty simple right here. I'd go with the long-term support version, and then the Vue CLI. You can get the instructions to download it through npm right here. Nice and easy. So let's put the browser off to the side. And to create our Vue app, we're going to do Vue create and then the name of the app. So it's going to be Vue create, and we'll say YT for YouTube to do. And I actually, I'm not going to be starting a call right now on Google Meets or Google Meet or Google Hangouts, just because I've got some stuff going on and I don't want things to run over. So I'm happy to do some more, one-on-one or some more group stuff or whatever. Just probably not tonight. So we're gonna go over some basics today, and we'll do some more in-depth stuff, directly in the coming days or weeks or whatever. There's no shortage of opportunities. Okay, so the settings. You can see I have a preset made, which is Vue2 router Vuex. And what I would use this one for is if I'm going to build a serious project. Something, for example, that has, I need state management, I need routing, and I need long-term support. Vue 3 is newer, and actually, this is kind of cool. It's in default now, whereas the last time I actually ran the Vue CLI, which was probably a few weeks ago at this point, I think it was still in beta. So that's good to know. We're going to start with Vue 3, but we're still going to use the options API, which is what Vue 2 has. So I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. What I will do right now is I'll go to manually select features so we can walk through what they are. Babel is what allows you to write ES6 syntax. So that would be like arrow functions, for example. It's the new modern JavaScript, the stuff that you're generally used to seeing. Let, const, all that stuff. TypeScript, Vue 3 has much better TypeScript support than Vue 2 did, but I'm still not a huge fan of how TypeScript interacts with Vue the way that it does with like React, for example, or even just like when I'm using node.js, I love using TypeScript. It just doesn't feel right with Vue, in my opinion. Not yet, but I know it's a lot better. Progressive web apps, they open up on your phone and they look like native apps, even though they're actually just web applications. So that's pretty cool. We're not getting into that today, though. The router, that's just for routing different pages. So you can set up rules, essentially, and say that if these conditions are met, or if the URL looks like this, route to this page, or show this view. So we're going to do something simple, so we don't need that. Vuex is state management. I'll do an entire separate video on that. I love Vuex. Some people really hate it. I think it's an awesome technology, though. The equivalent with React would be Redux. CSS preprocessors, that would be if you want to use something like Sass, Less, Stylus, any of those CSS frameworks, you would need a preprocessor. Probably need post CSS installed. I'd imagine this will install that. As far as the linter and formatter, we don't really need this because I have stuff installed with VS Code already, but we'll leave it up there because it will give us good error reporting in the terminal. It'll let us know if there's an error that, although technically it will work, it doesn't follow best practices, and therefore we'll figure out what that is up front. I'm not getting into unit testing or end-to-end testing right now either. That's just the quick overview of what these options are. So we're going to leave it as is. That you can select the version right here. There we go. If you hit enter, you can choose version 2 or version 3. For our purposes, it doesn't really matter. I'll do version 2. I'm sorry, version 3. And then again, we're just doing error prevention only. And then we want to lint on save. We don't want to lint and fix on commit. Maybe you do. That's not how I like to do things. And then where do you prefer the config for Babel, ESLint, etc.? You can have them in dedicated config files, or you can have it in the package.json file. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. I'm sure I've chosen both of them at different times for different reasons. I'm going to throw everything in the package.json file just for a neater looking layout. And no, I'm not going to save this as my default. So we'll give it a second. It'll start up. This should actually be pretty quick. There's another way that you can start Vue projects. You can use the Vue UI. These are all hard to articulate properly. Vue UI. And if I remember correctly, I believe you can actually just type Vue UI right into the terminal. So we'll take a look at that real quick, but I'm not going to actually use it. So right now, after running Vue create, and again, we named it YT to do. Now we have a YT/to-do project in our folder. So if I do ls to list the folders, you see we have it right there. So I'm going to cd to change directory into it, and we'll go into that folder. And now if we list everything out again, now you can see that we have all of the basic stuff that we need for the project. So let's open this in VS Code. We'll say code, period, open. All right, so now that we're in VS Code, we have the terminal right here. We're just going to use this to start the app in a second. Real quick, we'll open up the source folder. If you install anything, it installs to the Node modules the same way that it does with any backend, anytime you're using Node. The public folder, this is the index. This is where the app is going to be injected, is this div right here. Yeah, it says built files will be auto-injected. So this is where your Vue app is going to inject itself, is into this HTML file. We also have our favicon right here. So we're not going to worry about that, the public or the node modules folder. We're going to jump right into the source folder, and we'll take a look at app.vue and hello-world.vue. So let me start the application. And I believe this is going to... This is funny because I absolutely love Vue.js, but I've been using React for so long now, or at least for like the last several weeks, that this almost feels a little bit foreign to me, but it's exciting because I really love Vue. Okay. We're going to take a look at the package.json file. So if we want to run it, we see there's a script called serve. So we can do npm run serve. We type that into the terminal. And now it's running at localhost 8080. So I'll do this. Slide this over, and we will open up localhost 8080 here. So here we go. We have our first Vue.js app. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys later. I'm just kidding. We're not leaving it there. All right, so let's take a look at what we're actually working with here. If we go to, let's start with main.js. You can see that we're actually importing create app from Vue. Now, create app, it's a method. We're passing in the app component, which is right here. We'll take a look at that in a second. And then we're mounting it to app. If you recognize this, it's from right here. If we go back to the public folder and index.html, we have this div ID for app. So when you think about when you're doing CSS, for example, your classes, you're going to reference class names with a period. So it might be card, and then you'd have all your CSS in here. If you're referencing an ID, you would do it like this. So that's how you can remember, assuming you're familiar with CSS, that's how you can remember that we're mounting it to the ID. I'm sorry, this would be app. We're mounting it to the ID named app. So now that we have that out of the way, again, we're mounting this app component. So let's take a look at the app component. It's broken up into 3 areas. We have template. I'll just go ahead and do this actually. We'll delete everything we don't need. We have the template, we have the script section, and then we have our styles. And you don't need to worry about that. Also, this export default we have right here, this is where all of your data is going to go. So the way that I would think about this is you look at the template, this is your HTML. The script section right here, this is going to be your JavaScript, and the style section here, this is going to be your CSS. So as long as you know a little bit of JavaScript, a little bit of CSS, a little bit of HTML, you'll be perfectly fine. Hey, Alex. Cool. Yeah, so got him. Did am I missing something, or you just mean that you happened to catch it while it was live? Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm missing something there. Yeah, so anyways, we'll just leave this nice and basic for now. The other thing that I deleted is we had a component in here. It looked like this. It actually didn't have the dash. We had hello world with a capital H, and it was self-closing, I believe. So we had a component that looked like that, which is referencing this hello world component right here on the left side. So that's all you have to do in order to put your components into other components. You also have to reference it inside of this script area. It might look a little bit confusing now. I promise it's a lot simpler than it looks. So let me just break it down to the basics here. We're going to actually delete this hello world.view component entirely. All right, so now our build isn't working anymore. Oh, yeah. Now I gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for stopping by. This should be nice, short, and easy. So if you check back later, the video should actually be done. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. Right now, let's just get something on the screen so that it will compile and we can see something. Let's add, for example, an H1, a heading, and we'll just say hello, Vue. Now we have a Vue.js application right here. One thing that I really like to do, if it's not a big serious project or anything like that, I like to use these Classless Css Frameworks. So let's search for that. There's a big list of them. One of my favorites is called Water CSS. It's actually the first one listed here. So I'm going to go to that. Now you can see that we have this the style sheet, the CSS right here. We can link to it right from the HTML file. So it says paste it into the head of your HTML. You can choose automatic, which will go based on the settings of the computer and the browser that you're using, or you can force it to be dark or force it to be light. You get a preview of what it sort of looks like, light and dark. So let's use the dark one. People seem to like dark themes. So we're going to go back to the index.html. We'll just paste that right here in the head. Now, if we go back to our app, you can see that we just have, we have a nice dark theme right now. Okay, so luckily there's not a whole lot of concepts to go over here. Vue is so easy that you can sort of hit the ground running without having to know a whole lot. If you're familiar with JavaScript, I'm sure that you've seen this type of thing before. All we're doing is we're setting an export. That's what allows components to import other components. When you say default, what you're referring to in that case is that when you import this particular component, you don't have to give it a specific name. So we will say export default. And then again, this was already there, but we have name. And then I personally just like to make it match the name of the file exactly, without the end of the file name. So this will just be app, just like it was. Now there's a few different things that we can put in here. Keep in mind that this is an object, so we have key value pairs. In this case, the name is the key, and the value is the string app. So we have data. One other thing I have to recommend, not to get too far ahead of anything, but we have some tools. I would recommend, there's a package with everything you need for Vue.js. I thought it was made by Sarah Drasner, but I could be wrong. Yeah, this one right here, Vue VS Code Snippets. This is an incredible extension. It has so many awesome snippets that make Vue.js development just 1,000 times easier. And then we have the Vue VS Code extension pack. I would imagine I probably have I have most of these already installed. But if you're getting started with Vue.js development, I would just install this whole pack because this is all good stuff. This is a theme made by Sarah Drasner. She's on the Vue.js team, if I remember correctly. So I choose to not use that theme. I also choose not to use the bookmarks extension, but everything else on here is great. So one thing that's really cool about that extension is now we have this data section here. I can do v data and press tab or enter, and it will fill in this data object. Since this is a JavaScript object, this export right here, we have to put a comma after app. So now we have the data section. All this is right here, this is just key value pairs. Think of this as the individual components state management. We have a few other things here. We have methods. So same thing, I'm going to do v methods, and it's going to fill in a blank method named name. We're going to change all of this. I'm just showing you guys what the sort of the building blocks of Vue are. And maybe I can make this a little bit bigger. All right, that should be a little bit easier to see. So now we have methods. One more thing that's important is we have computed properties. And just like the methods, it filled it in with a computed property with the name, and it's returning this .data. So I'm actually going to go ahead and delete this. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to delete this. Actually, just this. So one more thing is we have watchers. I don't know if we're actually going to use any watchers in this app. No, I can't imagine we will. But it still is something that you definitely want to know about because they are very handy. So let's get started and actually make some stuff happen here. I don't have something planned out in advance, so I'm going to talk through this the way that I would be thinking about it if I'm here trying to build this app right now. So the first thing is we're going to pick some data points that we need. One of them is going to be the to-dos. So that's going to be an array. Let's say that we're going to have an array of to-dos, and we're going to push our to-dos into there, and we can pop the to-dos out of there once they're completed or archived or however we want to set this up. So let's say to-dos, and that's just going to be a blank array or an empty array. And then let's add a little bit of HTML here. So between these template tags, this is where we can add our HTML. There always needs to be one root element. So right now we have hello Vue, but if we copy this, it actually might work. Yeah, this will work. I think that's strictly a Vue 3 thing because in Vue 2 you couldn't do that. So if you ever run into that issue, if you get an error and it won't compile, all you need to do is wrap everything in a div like that, and you'll be just fine. And I think I'm still going to do that just because it's a habit that I like to stay in. So this is just plain HTML for the most part with one small but important distinction. Let's give this a class. And we will just call this app since this is the app component and this is the outermost HTML element, the outermost wrapper. Again, you don't have to do this. This is something I choose to do. We'll change this heading to tasks. And let's give it a few sample tasks just so we can see what it's going to look like. Let's start with an unordered list, and we will give it some list items. Let's say maybe 3 just to see how it looks. So this is our unordered list. I'm going to give everything class names. They don't necessarily need them because I'm not going to be doing much styling, but I figure there's no harm in it. It'll be descriptive if nothing else. So we'll say do laundry. Get groceries. And mow lawn. So now when we save it, we have the live reload. And you can see it updates right away. We have our bullet points right there. One more thing that I want to do, let's do a little bit of styling here. For our list items or our unordered list, I don't want to see these bullet points. So let's actually get rid of those. And that is going to be, what is it, style none, text decoration. I always forget this one. No, it's a list decoration. List style. There we go. So now we've got rid of the bullet points. Maybe we want to make this a little bit bigger, so let's give it a size of 1.2 rem. Okay, so it's a little bit bigger now. Maybe a little bit of padding. I'll do 5 pixels. Actually, you can see it actually lost some padding when I did that. So if I comment this out, I would imagine that's probably thanks to Water CSS, this CSS framework that we threw in there. So that's actually okay. Let's, instead of doing padding, let's do margin. Yeah, it doesn't make much of a difference. This will actually look better on second thought. Let's do that with the list items instead of the unordered list. There we go. I think that looks a little bit better for our tasks, our to-dos. All right, so we have the very basic start of a layout right now. We also need an input. So let's put that under tasks. Again, just it's HTML. That's all we're working with right here. So it's going to be text. And then we're going to use a directive we can either use vbind or vmodel. Vmodel, this is the first Vue feature that you're going to see. And I think this is really cool. So this feature is actually what got me hooked on Vue originally. Both vmodel and v4. Now directives are special functionalities that are sort of baked into the, I guess you could say, the syntax of the HTML for all intents and purposes. Angular uses directives, Vue uses directives, React doesn't. React is a little bit different. So we're going to say vmodel, that's v-model equals, and then we're going to give this a name. What this is referring to is it's going to refer to two-way data binding. So let's attach it to a variable. That variable will be called new task. So now that we added a new variable right here, we need to define it in our data section. So we will just say new task, and we'll make it an empty string. Or you can make it say null. Either way, it doesn't really make a difference. This is JavaScript. You can kind of do whatever you like. Null is probably best practices. Now, since we used vmodel up here, it's going to actually sync it in both directions, which is really nice because if you're familiar with React, it's a lot more complicated with React for such a simple task. So this directive, in all essence, it's syntactic sugar that's saving you a good amount of code. And you're about to see why this is so cool. Let's actually look over two other things here. We'll look over templating, and we'll see how vmodel works. So let's put an H3, a heading here. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this inside of curly braces. That will let us print out a variable to the screen. It can be a computed property, it can be the result of a method, or it can be a data point. So let's give it the same variable. Let's just paste this right in here, new task. So if I save it now, there's nothing there yet, but once I start typing, you can see that the heading is syncing with the box. So that's what vmodel is. This input right here, every time I type something into it, it's going to update the variable that it's synced with. So now that you've seen how vmodel works, I'm going to delete this H3 because we don't need it. As a matter of fact, let's do this. We'll add a button here, and we'll make the name on the button change as you type that in. So we'll have a button, and then we'll use the template. and we'll put new task right here. Right before that, let's say add. And then we'll get rid of this h3. So now, as we type something in here, we'll say, it'll say add cooked dinner. We can even put some quotes around here. This isn't something you'd probably ever see, you know, in the wild, with my air quotes there. But it's still, I think it gets the point across. For learning purposes, it's probably not a bad example. So we have the text box, and then we have the button. Now you can see, though, that since we have this, the quotes right there, they're going to show up even when it's empty. Now that's kind of ugly, so what else can we do here? This is actually a really great use for a computed property. So let's take a look at computed properties. We are going to call this new task button. And it's going to look just like a JavaScript function. Oh, okay, it's giving me the error because we're not returning anything yet. Now, computed properties always need to return a value. There's no purpose to them if you don't return a value. So let's say that the new task button is always going to return the new task. I'm sorry, let's do it this way instead. We will use template strings, so 2 backticks, and then we'll make a template literal here, and it's going to have new task, but before and after it, we'll have the quotes. Now, it says right here that it's not defined. The reason is that if you're referencing something else, then you need to use the this keyword. So I'm going to actually close the terminal. All we have to do is add this dot, and now it'll be there with the quotes. Now we also want the word add on there, right? So add this dot new task. Now we just need to reference this instead of doing it the way that we're doing it currently. If we change this to new task button and get rid of the word add, now you can see it does the same thing, and it still has a little quirk there. So for example, if we refresh it, it says add null. So let's add some conditional things here. The cool thing about these computed properties is that you can actually treat them just like any other method, function, whatever the case is, as long as you're returning it at the end. So let's throw in a little bit of conditional logic. We'll say if this.newTask, and we'll just say if it's null. We can do that just like that. Then return add task. And then else, so if it's not null, then we're going to return add plus whatever we have there. We can also do this. I'm assuming that some of you who are maybe a little bit newer with JavaScript, this might feel a little bit more intuitive for you. There we go. So now if we refresh it, before it would say add null, now it says add task. But as soon as we start typing, it updates to say my new task. And the reason that that's so easy and only takes a couple lines of code is because Vue is awesome and it makes a lot of this stuff super easy for you. So there's a few other things that we need to do now. We actually need to make it so that when we add a task, it needs to update the UI, because right now this button isn't doing anything. So there's another directive. It's an important one that you're going to be using quite a bit in Vue. That would be v on click. But there's an easier way to do it with Vue. You can just say @click. And then everything in Vue happens inside of a string like this. So what do we want to happen when we click this button? Let's say that we want it to call a button click handler, which we're about to define inside of the methods. We'll call it the add task handler. So bear with me for a second here. I'm sure this will click in just a second. So we have this add task handler. Let's add it in here under the methods. If you're not familiar, a method is just a function that's part of an object. So if you look at our Vue component as an object, when we add functions to it, we're calling those methods because the methods are functions of an object. So we're going to add task handler. And then what do we want this to do? We want it to take the, what do we call it? The new task. And we want to add that to the to-dos array. So we can do to-dos.push. Now, we have to add the this keyword to it because we're referencing other items on the same object here. So let's add this dot. And luckily, the IntelliSense is smart enough to let you know if you make a mistake like that. It'll tell you exactly what you're missing, too. It's pretty good about that. So let's actually just print out the array right to the body. It's called to-dos. Let's just see what it looks like if we throw it in here. Yeah, so you can see that every time we click the button, it's adding whatever's in this box into the array. One of the other things is that when it's empty, we can add null items or empty strings to the array. We don't want to be able to do that, so we're going to add a little bit more logic to it. We're going to say if, and what do we want to say here for the logic? We want to say if the new task variable is empty, we don't want it to happen. If there's a value in there, then we do want it to happen. So if this dot new task, and we can say is not null with 2 exclamation points like that. If it's not null, then push it. And let's see what the error is. Okay. So it's saying double negation. I'm not sure if this is because I have Prettier set up on my computer or some sort of linter. In regular JavaScript, this would work just fine. I'd imagine probably in Vue also if I change my ESLint settings. But it'll do pretty much the exact same thing if we do it this way. So now if I try adding an empty value, it won't do anything. Let's see what happens if I try adding an empty string. Same thing. And now if I try to add some actual text, there we go. So now it's working a little bit better. We're getting a little bit closer. Also, when we click this button here, we want it to get rid of this value. So we're going to push it, and then we're going to set the new task back to null. This dot new task equals null. So let's give it a go. Let's add an item, and it wipes it out. Perfect. Okay, whatever. I can't spell today. No problem. Cool. So now we know how to make the array. Now, the other thing that we need to do is let's make it so that when we actually add the tasks, it displays them right here. This might actually be what sold me on Vue, not just the button thing like I mentioned or vModel. The directives are probably my favorite part of Vue now that I'm thinking about it. So there is a directive called v_for. And it's going to allow you to use a for loop inside of your template, inside of your HTML. So for this list item, we say v_for equals, again, just like everything else in Vue, it's going to be inside of a string. So we're going to say for each to-do inside of our to-dos array, we want it to print out the to-do. So the way that's going to look is for to-do in to-dos. Then we use a template and we want it to print out to-do. Now the reason we're getting an error here is because we need a key. What we can do in order to get this key is we can either use, if we're using an object, we can use an ID or something from the object, or if you're using just a straight array like this, you can also do this. If you wrap this new variable that we're creating to do, if we wrap that in parentheses, now we can do comma I. It doesn't have to be I, this can be anything. IDX, it's the index. All right, so for to do of index I in to dos, show the to do. Now the key, this is so the browser or the DOM can tell the difference between different items so it can render them properly. We're just going to list the key as I. Now you can see there, right here, all you're seeing is an actual string with the letter I in it. So when a lot of people see Vue, the first thing they notice is that everything is happening inside of strings and it seems really unintuitive. Since we are using these special directives here and we're using the Vue plugins, we're getting the proper syntax highlighting. We're not getting it right here because key isn't a Vue directive. Key is perfectly valid within HTML, generally speaking. So in order to distinguish it, we're going to put a colon before it. And now the browser knows that we're referring to a Vue.js directive. And it gets rid of the error message. So let's save that. Let's also give ourselves a few default to-dos. So we'll use the some of the defaults. We'll say do homework, learn Vue.js, and can't think of a third one, and I can't think of a third one that fits the task here. We'll say learn TypeScript. How's that? I'm actually looking forward to going over TypeScript with you guys. All right, so if we refresh it now, we've got our items here, and then we have the array that we were printing out for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that array. Now we have just our tasks, a place to enter the task, and yeah, that's about it. So we can add another button at the bottom, and that will just say, maybe clear out all of the tasks. All right, we'll just say clear. And then when we click on it with that @click directive, we want it to call a method called clear, what do we want to call it? Clear to-dos. So now in our methods, we need another function or another method called clear to-dos. Regular function syntax. The difference, the only thing that's not, I guess you would say standard, is that because, again, this is an object, we need commas to separate it. So when we click on clear to-dos, we want to reset the to-dos item back to a blank array. So we're going to reference this .todos equals empty array. So let's try it out. When we click it, there we go. It gets rid of them. We reset it, we click it, it gets rid of them. All right, so we've got a few of the basic components now. We might also have statuses. So we might have something that's pending or complete or maybe archived. So let's add a little bit more logic here for these. Let's see, how can we distinguish? Let's do it with emojis. I think that's probably a pretty good way to do it. So instead of having just a text item inside of this, let's make it an object, an array of objects. So let's create a to-do item. And what do we want the to-do item to look like? We might not necessarily use this, but I would like to sort of demonstrate the shape. A to-do item is going to be a name, like do homework. It's going to have a status, like active or pending, and then a visibility. We'll make that a Boolean. So we'll say true or false. So by default, we're going to make everything pending, and we're going to make the visibility on them all true. But then maybe we click it once and it goes to from pending to completed. We click it again and it archives it and hides it. That can be one way we can do this. So for each of these, just like with the button, we have @click. We can actually also do that on the list item technically. It might not be the best way to do things, necessarily speaking, but it will work. Or it might not because we have two directives. I don't think that's an issue though. Okay, change status. This doesn't exist yet, so we need to create this. Just like we did before with the add task handler and the to-dos. We'll have change status, and we have to add a little bit of logic. So we will say if, and then we want to check this particular item. So how do we check if this particular item is already pending or already posted? We need to pass in an index, or we need to pass in the item. So let's take a look at how we can do that. For each item, we could pass in this index right here. That might possibly work. I'm not sure. Let's try it out. And I'm actually going to move this over to the right so we can look at it like we're reading left to right. I actually have no idea if this will actually work. This isn't probably like the go-to way to do it, but I think it'll be cool if it does work. Okay, so we're going to pass in the yeah, this is kind of a weird solution. I really am interested though. Anyway, since we're passing something into this to change status, just like a regular function, we can do it like this. We just define that it's going to take in some input. So let's say if value as a matter of fact, let me take a step back. This is not a very clean or, this isn't a good way to actually do this. So let me change this a little bit. Okay, so I think there's actually a lesson here. Let me take a step back and tell you what I was about to do so we can avoid it, because it was actually a really stupid direction I was heading in with that. Right now we have our array of to-dos, and these are just strings. Nothing complicated, just plain old strings. But we actually need some data besides the string, because we need to know if it's visible and we need to know what the status is. So that means that our array needs to have objects in it. Now, there's no reason to jump into changing the status of an object that doesn't exist yet. So first, let's just take a step back and actually get this to be formatted correctly. So let's actually use these right here. Okay, so for each to-do, for the to-dos array, we're going to have individual to-dos. And they're going to have this shape like we mentioned earlier, so I'll just cut this, paste it right there. I'm going to make 3 copies of it. And I'll just copy and paste the titles. Do homework, learn TypeScript. We'll delete the original strings. We'll delete this original to-do item. And now we're actually getting a printout of each individual object. Or we're getting a printout of each of the 3 items on each of the 3 list items, if that makes sense. So what we're going to do is we actually need to specify which one we want to show. We want to show the name, because we have name, we have status, and then we have the visibility. So we're going to set this to name. We can do that with dot notation, to do dot name. And there we go. We're back to how we were, but now we have a proper structure this time. So, all right. The next thing that we need to do is to be able to change the statuses. So if we have an active, if we have something that's pending and it's not completed, maybe the emoji for that will be, let's pull up the emojis and see what our options are. Okay, so we don't have anything that represents pending. Maybe like we'll say a blue circle if it's pending, a green circle if it's complete, and then, yeah, and then if it's archived, we'll just change the visibility to false. Or I guess we could use checkboxes too. I mean, doesn't that make a little bit more sense? I think so. All right, yeah, let's do that. We have this checkbox, and then let's find an empty checkbox. I'm just going to throw a few of them in there because I'm not sure which ones are going to look best. Okay, so selecting for these. I think that these would be some good options. Maybe this black one right here for incomplete, and then this one for complete. Or we can use these first two. Yeah, I think maybe this is best. Or we could even do these two. Any of these look like they could work. I'm going to go with these two right here. So, anyways, the way that this is going to work is just like we can reference with dot notation. We have to do dot name. We can also add the, we can add a little bit of logic here also. So we're going to add another template, or another, template string here. And this is going to be to do dot status. Now that's only going to print the word out. So now we're going to add a method that's going to take the status, and based on what the input is that we give it, it's going to give the proper output. So we can call that the status emoji. And the way that status emoji is going to work is it's going to take in a value, and then if the value is, and that's using 3 equal signs, if the value is pending, we're going to return this empty thing in a string. We'll say else if value equals complete, then we're going to return this one. And in case you didn't know that, emojis can be used just like regular strings. They're actually characters in other languages. And then we're going to have an else case here. So if there's a different option, we'll just return nothing, because there shouldn't be. So now how do we invoke this method? It's actually super easy. All we have to do is call it directly right here inside of the template strings. So we have status emoji, and then the value that we're passing in is this to do. So let's save it, and now we have the boxes next to all of them. So that's pretty cool. And if we change this to complete, there, now we have, it's checked. And that contrast looks really bad. So let's give this a different check mark. Maybe this one will look all right. Yeah, that works. Good enough. Okay. And now if we want to hide it, maybe we want to make it so when you actually click on it, so you can actually like click on the individual item, and well, you could hide it that way, but then you couldn't show it. So let's come back to that in a second. First, I want to work on toggling the status here, like toggling whether it's posted or pending or completed. So let's change these, or let's wrap them rather, in anchor tags or buttons. Either one should work. Let's just do it. Now here's the difference. If we do it as an anchor tag, like a link, like href, like you would see in HTML, it will give us the pointer, but we can also just make the pointer cursor with CSS. So that's not a huge deal. Or we can even just leave it as text, and we can just add some reactivity to that. So if we're gonna do this, here's what I think I would do. Let's wrap this entire thing in a div. And I'm sorry, bear with me for 1 second here. Okay, sorry about that. Oh yeah, okay, so we're gonna wrap this whole thing in, well, let's do a span, because these are both inline. So we'll do span. We'll move this up in there. And now we can actually add some reactivity. Let's wrap this in a div now. So if you're confused, bear with me for 1 second, and this will make sense. We're going to add another div around the to-do name. And now what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the CSS here, or the style. Let's see, what are we working with here? This span. Let's give it a class name. And we're going to call this list item. So if we go down to the style, we're going to reference list item. And it's a class, so of course we're referencing it with the period. We'll say display flex. And now we're back to inline again. Now the difference, the reason that was worth doing is because now we can differentiate between clicking on the emoji or clicking on the actual text. Because we can apply directives or listeners or anything like that directly to these surrounding divs. So let's do this, for example. Let's add an on-click listener. we'll say @click, just like we did with the button. And then what do we want it to do when we click it? Let's just do an alert. And the alert should say clicked. Will that work? Oh no, okay, so if you see what I did here, it should be pretty obvious, I think at least. I think that my syntax highlighting is sort of fighting with the stupidity of the way that I wrote this out. There we go. Because there were double quotes, so it was taking this as a string, and then it was taking this as a string, and it didn't know what was going on in the middle there. So if we click on it, it should create an alert that says clicked. It actually might not work. Yeah. And now this is more just out of my own curiosity. I want to see if this makes a difference, but there's no lesson to be learned here. This is just me wanting to try something. Okay. All right, so forget that. I thought it would be a cool little, demonstration of sorts, but totally not a big deal. Maybe we should make it so when you click on any of this stuff, it'll change the status, but I still would like to do it for just this, for the time being at least. So when we click on it, what do we want to actually happen? We want to change the status from pending to complete, or complete to pending. So we're going to create a method called toggle status. And in order to know which status to toggle, we're also going to have to pass in the index. So this is going to be toggle status. And then we're going to pass in the index, which is represented by I here. All right, so now let's do this. I was trying to do that alert before. Let's do it this way. Clicked on item plus I. And we're passing in I right here. Again, it's a function, it's a method. So now if we click on it, let's see if we get that alert. There we go. Clicked on item 0. Clicked on item 1. Clicked on item 2. In case you're not familiar, I would hope that you are if you're watching this, but JavaScript is 0 indexed, so the first item of an array is always going to be 0. So if you actually wanted this to show the exact number, you could just do I plus 1, and then it'll actually give you the correct count instead of the index. Clicked on item 1, clicked on item, we would have to parse it down into a number and add it, but you get the point. It's not something I'm planning on doing. Okay, now the question is, how do we actually get this to change the index? To change the value. We're passing the index in, so we can actually reference this directly. We can say this.todos at index I dot, so let's walk through it. We will say this.todos at index I dot status. And before we do anything else, again, let me just do an alert to show you what it's doing. All right, I saved it. Now if we click here, it's going to print out complete. If I click here, it's going to say pending. So now we know that we're actually grabbing the value from the exact index. So here's what we want to do now. We will say if complete, we're going to have a local variable within this scope. So let's take a step backward. Let's create this variable called complete. It's going to be a constant, and the value is going to be okay. Sorry guys. Again, let me take a step back in the explanation because this isn't a I'm not doing a great job explaining this. What we're going to do, instead of having to type it out on more than one occasion, we're going to throw it in a variable, and that's going to be the actual to do. So we'll call this to do, or let's call it, let's say, active to do, because it's the one that we're actively working with. This active to do variable can only be referenced within this method, nowhere else, because we're defining it inside of this method. So now that we have the active to do, we can change this to if active to do equals pending. So if the active to do dot status equals pending, then we want to change the value of this dot to do at index I dot status equals complete. Else, so if it's not pending, then we're going to take this dot to do dot status and change it to pending. Now there's a lot of different ways to do this. You can do it however it feels natural for you, but this is just, you know, one of maybe like 3 common different ways to do it. Let me get rid of that alert. Okay. So now when I click on this, there we go. We can check it or uncheck it. Let's go ahead and change the CSS to give us a pointer instead of this text looking thing. I just forgot what we called it. Okay, so we have the list item, and then we have the toggle status. Let's call this checkbox. So now down in the styles at the bottom, we're going to have checkbox. We want the cursor to be pointer. So now when we hover, there we go. When we hover over it, we get the pointer now. Cool. All right, so it's coming along. Looks like there's a space in one of these and not the other. No? All right. Okay, so what's next here? The next thing that we're going to do is to be able to hide the items. So if we want to, let's say that if we want to hide it, we can just click on it and it will hide the item, or it will archive it. So it's going to be very similar to what we just did with the emojis. Let's create a method and we'll call it hide selected item. Hide selected item, does that make sense? Or hide to do. And again, it's going to take the index in as an argument. We need to add the comma because it's another entry within this key object pair thing. And we want it to do exactly what we did right here, where we're going to get the active to do. It's going to be referenced as this dot to do's of that index. And then if, wait a minute, I have to talk through this again because you can't click on it to show it again if you hide it. So once you click it, you're actually archiving it. With that said, let's rename this from hide to do to archive to do. Okay, if active to do dot status, what is it, visible? Yeah. If active to do dot visible we actually don't need an if statement because there's only one option here. There's just the option to archive it. So let's actually get rid of this too and simplify it a little bit. We'll say this dot to do at index I dot visible equals false. It's literally just that simple. This to do at index I and then the value of visible on that object is going to be changed to false. Now, because this is so small, it's actually possible that we can put the logic right up in the template here, although that wouldn't be best practices. That would be something you could do with a small app, but then if you're actually using a database or whatever, you're not going to use that type of solution. So just like this, we have a class called checkbox for the checkbox. So let's add a class called to do right there. And then when we click on it, we want to archive to do, right? We called it archive to do. Yep, and then we're passing in the index. So that's going to change it from visible true to visible false. Right now, that's not going to make a difference. We can click on this all we want. Nothing's going to happen. So that's where we have to have another directive here. And that is going to be, there's two of them we can use. We can use vif or we can use vshow. Vshow will actually hide it in the CSS, whereas vif will delete it out of the DOM. So let's do vshow. They have, different purposes. They accomplish a very similar outcome at the end. So it really depends on your use case. If you're working with something that's like highly performant, you're using best practices, you want the DOM to run a little bit better, you're worried about every last kilobyte, maybe you're going to use it, vif instead of vshow. But just like with vif, you can have velse and velsif also. So you can add all of that logic right into the template, right into the HTML, which is awesome. So vshow, what are we going to reference here? It's going to be to do dot, what is it, visible? Yeah, to do dot visible. So it will show us what's there if visible is true. Otherwise, it won't show it. And if we click it, it should toggle the to-do visibility. So let's try clicking it, and there we go. It hides, and they're all gone. But since this is actually a great example, because if we do this, we hide it. Now you can see that there's nothing there, but when we hit clear, now the button moves up. Whereas I'd imagine if we make this, if we change this from vshow to vif, I wonder if the button will move on its own. Let's find out. Nope, same thing. And that's because we have the span or the divs. We have the span with the two divs in here. So that would have to be deleted. We can actually add a little bit of conditional logic. And this is kind of cool. I didn't think we were going to get to this today. But let's add a watcher because this is a perfect opportunity to use one. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to make the name of this, I guess you would call it a method, but you want to make the name of the watcher match the name of the variable that you're looking for. So let's change this. Let's create a variable called list is empty, and it's going to have a Boolean output, and we'll make it a computed property. So let's actually go down to the computed properties and say list is empty. And in order to see if it's empty, it's going to return this.todos.length equals 0. Yeah, so this list is empty will be true if there are 0 to-dos. So now we go to our watcher, And we're going to change this also to list is empty. And I'll open the terminal here. We have the new value and the old value. You could also omit this completely if you don't need it. We don't need it right now, so we're going to leave that on list is empty. And then whenever the value of it changes, then we can invoke a method. So what do we want to do here? We only want to show the tasks if there are tasks to show. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so I'm adding a vShow directive on the unordered list item. So vShow, and I'm saying list is empty, but we have the exclamation point here, so we're saying if the list is not empty, we want it to show. So there we go. Right now, it's showing everything. Let's see what happens if we get rid of these. Let's change this to an if. See if that makes a difference. Oh, I don't think I put the logic in here. Okay. Okay, better example. Again, I probably should have planned this out a little bit, but it's all right. We'll get there. We want this to, instead of returning this.todos.length equals 0, let's just return this.todos.length. So we'll always have the length of the list as a computed property. That's a perfect computed property. Let's rename this to task count. And now we can also put the task count up here in this header. There we go. All right, we're going to get rid of that because we're not using it anymore. Perfect. Okay, so now we can hide tasks. We can check them, uncheck them. We can clear them. But when we hide them, this number isn't changing because all we're doing is changing the visibility. So maybe a better way to do this would be to have a separate list at the bottom called archived. So let's throw that in there just so we'll have a horizontal rule. And then let's have another list. Let's just copy this. And this is going to say archived. So let's give it a heading. Okay, then we only want to show these if the item is set to, if visible is set to false. So we'll add an exclamation point here. There we go. Now when we click it, it's going to move down there. I could probably also add, add some logic now to move it from archived back to the tasks up here. That'd be kind of cool. But again, this is just to sort of get the lay of the land and see what Vue.js is all about. We don't need to get into all of that today. All right, so we have the archived tasks right here. Clear should still get rid of them. We add a new task. Okay, now that's not showing up. Let's find out why that's happening. Let's open up the Vue Dev Tools. This is always really helpful. I really love the Vue Dev Tools. They're insanely, insanely helpful. Okay, so we can see our to-dos here. Now, if we're looking at our to-dos, okay, I'm not sure if you guys see what's wrong with this. I think it's pretty obvious right now. When we create a new to-do, we're still putting in a string when it's supposed to be an object because we changed that. So let's fix how that works. Make sure I don't need this task count anymore. So we have the to do. Let's actually do it this way. We'll say to do. We're going to create a new variable. Const to do equals, and I'm going to paste in one of these sample items here. We want the name to be this.newTask. We want the status to be pending, and we want visible to be true. Then, instead of pushing the new task, we're going to push the to-do object. And then, of course, the new task is going to be overridden by null. So, all right, let's refresh this. See, that was just 2 seconds of looking at the Vue dev tools. It was really easy to figure out what the problem was. Okay. So now I'm going to use the selector, and let's see what we have going on right here. So we have a list item, list item, list item, list item. All right, so when we archive an item, let's see how we're doing it. When we click an item to archive it, archive to do. Then we want to get rid of the actual list item. So we can add vshow. Actually, let me think through this for a second. Okay, so we have this span right here. And we have if to do is visible, then we're going to let it show. But if it's not visible, we're still showing the list item. So that's the problem. Let's see if I can just move the span outside of the list item. Not exactly best practices, but I think it should help with this weird little spacing issue. No, okay. Bad move. All right, what do we actually want to do here? We want to delete the list item when we click on this. I don't think we can have a vif and a v4 on the same item. Okay, so let's actually fix this up a little bit. The reason I'm running into these issues in the first place is because this for loop right here, this should probably be on the unordered list instead of the list item. That'll give us a lot more freedom to work with this. Okay, so that's a little bit better. Now we can actually add the vif tag right there. Okay, much better. So everything's in the right place now. It was just stupid of me to put the loop on the list item in the first place. And now we have something weird going on with the styling now because I styled it specifically for that purpose. So it's that we have 10 pixels of padding. We can just delete that completely. Cool, looks good. And as a matter of fact, let's get this button and this text input on the same line. We'll create a span with a class name of input. And we'll call this input. There we go. And we're going to wrap the input and the button. And then we're going to add flex to, what do we call it? To input. Display equals flex. There we go. Now it's inline. That looks a little bit better. Cool. Also, for the text right here where we have archived showing, maybe we don't need to show the text if there is nothing archived. So let's center this, we'll center this, and then we'll add a conditional here. We can do it with an inline ternary operator. So where do we have archived? Right here. We're going to say v if and then we're going to check a computed property called archived task count. Because if it's 0, this will be null. If it's more than 0, it'll be truthy, and we'll see the text show up. So let's create a computed property called archived task count. So the way that we want this to work is we want to loop through each of the to-dos. This.todos for each to-do what are we doing? For each to-do, we're going to cycle through it. Then we're going to check the to-do dot visible which is going to be true or false. If it's true, we're going to do nothing. We'll just return. Else, we will say archived to do plus plus, in which case we're going to create let archived to do equals 0. And then at the end we need to return archived to do. Okay, I think that should work. So we're going to take the archive task count. Oh yeah, it looks like it did work. Cool. Okay, so the other thing is that the reason the spacing is a little bit different is because I moved the way these were iterating on the top one, but not the bottom one. So let's fix that. Same thing as before. Move that up. I'm going to move this up. All right, nice. Looks good. So yeah, I mean, it's not the most beautiful looking app, not by a long shot, but hopefully this does give you the sort of like the basics of Vue. But there is one last thing that obviously it's important enough that we should probably, throw it in there real quick. It's the way that components work. So I can't think of a great use case right now, But yeah, let's just do this. Let's create a new component. We'll add a new file, and we'll call this main.vue. And I'm going to take all of the logic from the app here. I'm just going to copy. I'm actually going to cut all of this. I'm going to go into main.vue. I'll paste this in there. We're going to go up to the name and change this to main. I'm going to change this to main. Now everything's going to disappear. If I do vbase-css, because I have that extension installed, now we have some boilerplate here. So we need to import the component. We need to import this main component. So in the scripts here, we have export default. We're going to add components. And the component name is main.vue. We don't need to add the .vue. Now we need to actually import it at the top of the script section. Import main from components/main. Now we still have the red squiggly outline because we're not using it yet. There we go, it's self-closing. Now we should have our app back. There we go. And that's just because we're calling in the component. We can also do this, for example. Let's go to app.vue. I'm sorry, main.vue. And we have this title. Oh no, we don't have any title. So let's make a title. Let's change this to h2. And then up here, we'll have h1. So we want it to show up as Vue to do app at the top. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to cut this. And now we're going to add a title in here. If we go back to app.vue, we can say title equals Vue to do app. So now we're passing in a property into the component. In order to make our main.vue aware of that, we need to add properties. Say props, or if you're using that extension, you do vprop. And there's two ways you can do props. You can have the type, which would be like string, number, object, or you can actually just make an array of strings. And it's going to be title, like that. So for something simple, this is probably the way I would opt to do it. Like this, actually. Okay, so props. We have a title. Yeah, I'm forgetting something here. Because I feel like that should have worked. What am I forgetting? Yeah, that's how React would work. You'd have props put in like that. Am I losing my mind here? Maybe in Vue 3 they got rid of the ability to do it this way with the array. Ah, I see. Maybe not. Oh, I have this set to number. It seems to be string. There we go. All right. Yeah, so we're defining a string. I'm setting the default to be an empty string, which I actually think you could omit that, and it should still work just the same. And one last thing, just for good measure, I suppose. Let's just center all of this stuff. So let's reference the main class. And I think we need to, center the input separately. We can change this to margin auto, I believe. That should work. Display flex, margin auto. What else are we missing? There we go, justify content. All right. Yeah, so that's about it. I mean, it's really some pretty simple stuff. I'm a horrible teacher, so I'm sure I didn't exactly do it any justice here. But hopefully, if nothing else, if you at the very least learned a little bit about Vue and sort of got a feeling for what it's like to work with Vue, that's great. That's all I can hope for. So yeah, that's going to be a day for me. I'm going to take off now. So thank you for anyone who stuck around here, and the video on demand or the recording should be available. Maybe I'll throw it up on GitHub and share a link with you guys in case you guys want to pick apart the code or anything. And next time, I think I'm just going to plan things out a little bit better so that we've got some more stuff to talk about. So I'm not winging it, at a moment's notice. Be a little bit more efficient. But in, what is this, 100 lines of code? 150 lines of code, give or take. We have a full active to-do list with reactivity, and it looks decent. Not something I would pay a monthly fee for, but yeah, it works. So that's it. I'll see you guys later.